we're thinking about wisdom because chapter 28, that's what it focuses on. It focuses on wisdom. And I hope that you've read this chapter tonight. It's talking about the wisdom that's necessary for each one of us to navigate through life, both in good times and bad times. Because someone mentioned this the other night, or it was Monday night, I think John Huffacre said this in our men's Bible study. He said there was a statement made, in the Christian life, especially in the Christian life, when it comes to circumstances and situations we're in, or that we experience in life, we're either headed into trying times, or in the midst of trying times, or exiting out of trying times. So there's always a sense, you're in one of the three positions all the time, headed towards currently experiencing or leaving some difficult times. It seems like that's the ebb and flow of our life. And as that unfolds, we need wisdom. We need understanding. We need knowledge in order to navigate through those different periods in our life in a way that is going to bring honor and glory to the Lord. Just as Job was in search of wisdom. Help me understand, is what he's saying. Help me understand why this is going on. Help me understand what's happening in my life. So when we think about wisdom, in a very secular sense, what is wisdom? What would be a simple definition of wisdom from a man's point of view or a secular sense? Knowledge. Often, understanding. When wisdom is when life experience meets or intersects with intellectual understanding. You bring those two together. When those two merge, over time there should be wisdom. The older we get, the more we mature. We should have experiences in life that have taught us. Therefore, we should be more wise in our latter years than we are in our younger years. When you find someone that's referred to sometimes as a person that has an old soul, he's young, but he has an old soul. And it might say about him, he's wise beyond his years. He just seems like that he has a handle on life that would be greater than he should based upon his years. But we're thinking about wisdom from a biblical perspective. How do we navigate life, both in the good and the bad, especially for those of us who are wanting to honor God with the life that He has given us? Now that we have come to know God through faith in His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, it should be of the utmost importance to us to honor Him with our life. We want to hear what when we enter heaven? Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And that's not going to happen by accident. We're not going to fall into that.
Did Job say wisdom was the fear of God?
He did say that, and the author writes that down here at the end of 28, and that's true. Proverbs 3:7, Proverbs 1 talks about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's getting your focus right, getting your priority, your perspective right, and that's where we want to be. So that's what chapter 28 is about. What he's talking about. So tonight when we think about wisdom, the chapter divides into 4 sections. Again, this is poetry. And as we read through this, we're reading poetry. And the words are painting for us pictures that are meant to help us understand or get to wrap our mind around this amazing wisdom that everyone needs, and where does this wisdom come from? So it divides into 4 sections, and we'll look at each one of them very quickly, and as we move through it, and draw a conclusion at the end. So each section it guides the reader to the only place where true wisdom can be found. 28 verses 1 through 11 says this: wisdom is not simply the result of relentless pursuit and hard work. Hard work's not always the answer to everything, although we need to work hard. Having a relentless pursuit along with hard work is not a bad thing. It is a good thing in life. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to produce the wisdom that we need. The wisdom we need in order to live our life out in a way that honors the Lord. So we'll read through these very quickly. You'll notice here that the theme behind these first 11 verses has to do with mining. A miner who is pursuing, who's looking for precious metals or precious stones. That's kind of the background to what's going on here. And although true wisdom is more precious than any metal or any stone, and we see that in verse 1, there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth. So we see the process here. He's talking about a person who is relentlessly pursuing great wealth out of the ground. And so what he says here is that, although wisdom is more precious than any metal or stone, it's not to be viewed as simply a commodity to be acquired. Wisdom is more than a material possession. So the miner here is looking for great wealth. In verse 3, man puts to an end the darkness. He searches the farthest recesses for ore in the blackest darkness. Far from where people dwell, he cuts a shaft. When the shaft is cut into the earth for people who are mining, you catch the context of deepest darkness. As you descend into the shaft, it's the deepest darkness. And man is willing to go down into that. As dangerous as that is, man's willing to pursue that for precious metals, for gold, for silver, or for diamonds. They're willing to do that. And he's saying that, this is, as important as that is, and man is willing to be relentless in pursuit of that, that's not necessarily, a commodity is not equal to the wisdom that we should be seeking in our life. So far from men, he dangles and sways. The earth from which food comes is transformed below as by fire. Prior to drills and pneumatic hammers and things like this, back in early times, oftentimes in the way that they would seek to try to get the ore out of the rocks in these underground mines is they would start fires. And they would heat up the rocks until the rocks would split. And then that they would be able to go into that split and crack the rock open to find the ore. So it's kind of what he's referencing here in this as he paints this picture for us. So, the food comes from above ground, right? The earth, from the earth, which food comes, is transformed below ground, or below, as by fire. Sapphires come from its rocks as they're split open. Its dust contains nuggets of gold. No bird of prey knows that hidden path. No falcon's eye has seen it. As sharp, you think about some of the best vision that is known to man is through like an eagle or a falcon. Well, they don't see below the ground, do they? All they see is above the ground. They've not seen down into the deepest recesses. And as he paints the picture here of how we should be pursuing wisdom. Proud beasts do not set foot on it. No lion prowls there. Man's hand assaults the flinty rock as he works through it to try to extract the ore out of it. And he lays bare the roots of the mountains. He tunnels through the rock. His eyes see all its treasure. He searches the sources of the rivers, leaving nothing unturned. That is the relentless pursuit of man for wealth, is the picture that he's trying to paint here. Well, that same relentless pursuit should be in our heart for wisdom. What wisdom? Not man's wisdom, but God's wisdom. If we can put all of our energy and effort into a commodity that brings prosperity to us, how much more would we be blessed if we put that same level of energy and effort into pursuing the truth of God's Word that's going to help us in the midst of the difficult situations and circumstances that we experience in life. Because all of us will testify to the fact that it's coming. It's one phone call away. For some people, it's one phone call away. He tunnels through the rock, his eyes, he sees all the treasure, he searches the sources of the rivers. He brings hidden things to light. He brings it out in this pursuit for wealth. Is what he's saying here. The example here is the miner is in great pursuit, but it's in wealth, whereby us as Christians and what Job would be saying, the picture be in application to Job as Job is seeking wisdom. His friends have not brought him any wisdom. His friends have not added anything to his life. And he says that in his discourses to them. Wisdom is not something that comes out of the ground. Wisdom comes from somewhere else. And so the second thing in verses that we see in verses 12 through 19, we see that wisdom is not something that can be purchased in the market. It's not something that we just go buy. We can't go buy a crystal and all of a sudden know the inner secrets of God. Hanging from your rearview mirror on your way to work as the sun goes through it. I've heard some of them like some people caught up in this Eastern mysticism, as the sun rises up in the morning and it goes through that crystal, and that crystal has a way of, reflecting out on you. It's bringing in life's energy. Well, it may get you killed if it blinds you at an intersection, too. And what hope do you have then? Wisdom is not something that's bought in the market. There are people today who would like to be able to go to the doctor and just get a shot of wisdom. And there may be some doctors who'd like to give you a shot of wisdom. If there was just a patch, especially some in the body of Christ, thinking that, hey, I gave my life to Christ, I walked an aisle, I've been baptized, I'll set that aside, I should be good, I'll use that as my get out of hell free card when I get to heaven. And they don't seek any wisdom in their life, wisdom to help them through what the Bible says. All of us are going to face hardship and difficulties before we enter the kingdom of heaven. I mean, God's the one who's saying that. Be prepared for that. So he's talking about here, wisdom is not something that you just go and buy by the ounce or the pound. The author, notice in verse 15, verse 16, and verse 19, the author repeatedly says something here 3 times. And what do we say when something in the Old Testament is repeated over and over and over? Pay attention. The emphasis is being drawn. What does he say? Wisdom cannot be bought. Look at verse 15. It cannot be bought. It can't be bought with the finest of gold. It can't be bought, nor can its price be weighed in silver. Look at verse 16. It cannot be bought with the gold of Ophir. The best of the best. It cannot be bought. Look at verse 19 as this little section comes to a close. It cannot be bought with pure gold. So the emphasis there is that the wisdom that we need, the wisdom that Job was seeking in search of, which is the same wisdom that we need to be in search of, is something that cannot be bought. Verse 12 says, but where can it be found? We know it can't be bought. Where can it be found? Where does understanding? So here we think about wisdom as being understanding, being as knowledge. The wisdom and knowledge of God, the understanding of God. Where can it be found? We know that wisdom does exist, but man, those of us as humanity, we cannot comprehend its value, and no material thing can compare with it. That's what we see in verses 17 and 19. Neither gold nor crystal can compare with it. In verse 19, the topaz of Cush, which I dare say, I hear the guy, who is our friend in the diamond business? What's his name? I hear him all the time on the radio. Is his last name Shane?
Tom Shane.
I'm Shane. Well, now his son's on there. So he said, now we've got 2 friends in the diamond business. And they always talk about going somewhere halfway around the world, carrying cash to buy the best of the best diamonds, right? Not only do you have a friend who has the best of the best diamonds. And so what he's saying here is the topaz from Cush cannot compare with wisdom. The things that this world values the most, they put on as the ultimate to possess, cannot compare with the wisdom that you and I need and the wisdom that Job was looking for. That's how important the wisdom of God, the truth of God, the Word of God, the understanding of God, the knowledge of God should be to us. It's more precious than anything this world has to offer. Somebody wrote a song about that, by the way. Verses 20 through 22, the next thing he talks about, the third thing. Wisdom is not something that we merely stumble upon. So it's worth our pursuit, but it's not anything that can be bought, and it's not something that we stumble upon. Acquiring understanding is not like finding a penny in the parking lot at the local store. And he also says that wisdom doesn't come from the living or the dead. Where does wisdom come from? Where can it be found? Verse 20 says, where does wisdom come from? Where does the understanding dwell that we need? Look at number 4. And this is verses 22 through 28. We find out here the author, as he brings this little section to a close, he says that wisdom is found only in God. In God alone is where wisdom is found. So what the author does as he concludes the chapter, he concludes by pointing us in the direction to where wisdom can be found. And that direction is to the Lord. Verse 23, God understands the way to it. God knows where wisdom is. And He alone knows where it dwells. God not only knows where wisdom dwells, He knows the way to it. God's ability to know all things, plus the fact that He created all things, explains why He is the source of all wisdom. And that's what He's talking about here. He knows the way to it. In verse 24, God, in His sovereignty, in His all-knowing ability, is able to view the ends of the earth. He sees everything under the heavens. Proverbs 15:3 tells us that the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch. And He keeps watch over those who know Him and those who reject Him. Verse 25, when He established, this is talking about as Creator, when He established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, takes us back to Genesis chapter 1. When He made a decree for the rain, God is the one who has ultimate sovereignty and authority over the rain. And He made a path for the thunderstorm. He talks about where it goes, where it comes from, and where it goes. You know, when God answers Job finally, beginning in verse 38, He begins to talk to him about, Job, where were you when I put these things in place? And Job begins to understand that, hey, maybe I shouldn't have challenged the Lord by saying, if you could just give me an audience, I will set you straight. He was wanting to present his case. But Job understands already here some of the things that will be fleshed out in 38 and following, chapters 38 and following. You know, God is the Creator. He's the sovereign Creator. He has authority over all these things. He sees the beginning from the end. And then He looked at wisdom. Notice that God looked at wisdom. The outworking of His knowledge. He looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And at that point, when all things were good, right? He said to man, the fear of the Lord, that's wisdom. It's the fear of the Lord. And to shun evil is understanding. The writer of Proverbs says the same thing in Proverbs 3:7. But the author, what's he saying to us here? I think he's saying that the fear of the Lord on one hand, and while shunning evil on the other hand, leads to wisdom. Reverence and awe, seeking God's face on the one hand, while turning away from the draw and desire of this world, the things this world has to offer. That's where wisdom can be found. That's where true wisdom dwells. So the wisdom of man in this story, leading up in the story of Job, leading up to where we find ourselves tonight, the wisdom of man has been pictured for us in the counsel of Job's three friends. They're saying, just look around. Obviously, Job, you're in the circumstance that you find yourself currently in. The reason for that, wisdom says, is because you have offended God. You have sinned against Him. So that's their counsel. That's the prevailing thought of man's wisdom. But that thought will always leave us falling short of God's glory. They were asking Him to renounce His integrity. They were asking Him to sin. What was Job's wife asking him to do? Curse God. And what did Satan say? You take his possessions, you take his family, and he will curse you. So they seem to be almost antagonistic in their counsel to him because they will not accept the fact that perhaps God is doing something greater in the life of Job. While the wisdom of God leads to blessing. You turn over to chapter 42. As the book comes to a close, we find out something amazing happens. Following verse 7, when you get down to verse 12, those who seek God's wisdom, those who pursue it relentlessly and work hard for it, those who know that it's not a commodity to be bought, those who recognize that it's not something that you stumble upon, but yet we follow the way of the Lord. In verse 12, the first part of verse 12, this is where Job ends up. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than He did the first. So the blessing comes from pursuing the wisdom of God. That's why it's important for us to heed the word of Psalm 119, 105. That the wisdom of God, which is found through the teaching of the Word of God, is the lamp to our feet and a light unto our path. Whenever we need knowledge and we need understanding, we need to know how to respond, how to react, how to reach out to others. Then we seek God's wisdom and allow His wisdom to lead us ultimately to the same blessing. The blessing that Job will experience. Not that we'll all end up with 12 times as much as we have at this point. Because 12 times as much wouldn't begin to explain, I don't believe, what's waiting for us. Would not begin to compare with that. The wisdom of God, something that all of us greatly need in our life.